Hey everyone, welcome to our webinar. We will give it a couple more minutes as people start to join. The people are rolling in. Welcome everyone. Excited to have you today at the Propel webinar about the anatomy of a perfect PR funding pitch. We'll give folks another minute or two as they roll in, and then we'll get started. If you want to drop in the chat the city or country that you guys are dialing in from, we always like to get a sense of where everyone's from. I'm in Tel Aviv, Israel. We got Brianna in San Diego, welcome. Nicole in Atlanta, welcome Nicole. Kim in Chicago, Rochelle from Philly. Melissa from Laguna Beach. I'm from LA originally, welcome Melissa. We got Megan from Reno, Jeff from LA, Maria from Chicago, welcome everyone. We'll give folks another minute as people are joining. Got a lot of folks here today from all over the US. Got D from Anchorage, Alaska, welcome. And as you're joining, if you want to drop in the chat where all of you are dialing in from, we love to get a sense of where the crowd is from. Janine from Kansas City, welcome Janine. We've got Raven from San Diego. We've got a few San Diegos, Natalie.
I've got my crew. Hey, everybody.
All right, we'll just give another few seconds as people roll in. And we will get started in a minute. All right, so as folks continue to roll in, first of all, we want to welcome everyone to our Propel webinar about the anatomy of a perfect PR funding pitch. And we're going to start a poll as people continue to join. We want to get a sense of how often do you pitch funding news? So you should all see sort of a few options pop up on your screen. It's option one is never, but I'd like to, monthly, quarterly, or anytime there's funding news. Would love to get a sense from all of you how often you pitch funding news. So just go ahead and answer the poll, and we'll look at the results in a bit. And thanks everyone for joining. Welcome Kashmir from London. We've got an international crew here from all over the US, from some other countries, and we're thrilled to have you today. So if we go to the next slide, our webinar today is about diving into the anatomy of a perfect PR funding pitch. We're gonna deep dive into some quantitative analysis that we did based on thousands of pitches, and it should be interesting. But before we get into that, just wanna introduce myself real quick and our guest, Natalie. So I'm Zach, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Propel. I'm a media relations guy at heart. Before Propel, I was in PR my whole career. I started an agency in New York in 2009 and was frustrated that there wasn't better technology for PR. So decided to build Propel, sold my agency, and here we are. And joining me today is Natalie Bartels, who's senior manager at VSC. Natalie is a born media strategist and a top media relations specialist at VSC. which is an award-winning agency headquartered in Silicon Valley that specializes in storytelling for startups, helping accelerate brands into vertical market leaders. She previously worked at BAM Communications as senior media strategist and has a passion for telling brands unique stories in the best way possible. Thanks, Natalie, so much for joining us.
Happy to be here. I have to plug, we're hiring at BSC, so if anybody wants to hit me up afterwards.
Awesome. So if we go to the next slide, just want to give a quick overview of our agenda. So we're going to be talking about the ups and downs of funding announcements in general. Then we're going to dive into the data and talk about the anatomy of a perfect PR funding pitch. Then we're going to talk about some success stories, what went right, what didn't. And then we'll talk about sort of targets and how to go about having the most success and impact in your pitch. And then we will open up to Q&A, which is always our favorite part. And as you have questions along the webinar, please jot them down. Please write them in the chat or the Q&A. And we will definitely answer your questions. And we want to take some quality time to do that. So moving along, I just want to give a quick background on Propel. Propel was founded 3 years ago. We're on a mission to make PR technology accessible to the masses. And we're reimagining earned media. We've launched many first-of-a-kind features, including the industry's only native Gmail and Outlook pitch plugins, the first business outcomes dashboard for PR, productivity metric, pitching preferences of journalists, and many other unique features. If you guys haven't checked out our site, please do at propelmypr.com, and we'll drop a link in the chat so you can check us out. And by the way, we're very modular, so we're proud of having packages set up in a way where you get what you need, you pay for what you need, and we're very modular in that sense. We're headquartered in Tel Aviv. We have teams based across the globe in New York, London, Miami, and we have over 500 customers, including the top brands and agencies from Microsoft to Real Chemistry, MNC Saatchi, US Air Force, and many others. So moving along, I want to start off by talking about some of the ups and downs that come into play when pitching funding announcements, especially when you compare it to other types of outreach campaigns. So if we move to the next slide, as we know, if you have a huge funding round, it's not going to be that hard to get coverage. If you're raising 500 million or 100 million or amounts like this, journalists typically will want to talk to you, whether it's TechCrunch or Wired or other pubs. Natalie, I want to ask you from your experience pitching funding news. I know VSC does a lot of funding news, represents a lot of startups and tech companies. What do you find as the best and worst times to pitch? What do you love and hate about pitching funding news? Would love to get a sense of sort of your overall thoughts on what this practice of pitching funding news looks like from your end.
Yeah. The poll earlier I couldn't answer, but I pitch funding news, I would say monthly or quarterly, just depending on the cadence of the new accounts. But I think timing wise, you really have to consider that these journalists have a lot of other things going on. And so giving them a good heads up, 3 weeks if possible, is amazing. 2 at the very minimum. And when you say time, I'm not sure if you mean like time of day or how far in advance, but obviously everybody's different. So be respectful of their time zones and the way that they like to be communicated with. And I think it's really important that you don't expect coverage because there's a big number or something. I've found it harder to place $150 million rounds than a $6 million round, depending on what it is that you're pitching and what the trend is in the space. So I think that's always the really important part to consider is why does this money matter? There's a lot of money going places and there's no shortage of it. So why this money? Why this company? why these investors are really important questions to ask depending on who you're pitching. TechCrunch wants to know who the investors are and why they care, versus Fast Company wants to know what the trend's happening and why this is part of that.
I love that. And it reminds me back to my early agency days. So we represented only tech companies and startups. And I remember back in about maybe 2011, I remember that we pitched TechCrunch and VentureBeat, and we had landed our first tech client that had funding news, and we got a feature in TechCrunch for like a $200,000 round. And at that time it was pretty rare to see that, but now it would be basically impossible to have TechCrunch cover that. And I noticed that my agency over the years, like, the rounds kept having to be bigger in order to get the attention of the journalists. And there were always the exceptions, but have you found that it's gotten harder to pitch, a $10 million round today than it was 3 years ago? Or what's your take on that?
Yeah. When I first got into PR, I don't know, 5-ish years ago. Yeah, if you had funding, then great. Here's a pitch, someone will cover it. You didn't really have to honestly put a ton of effort into it. If it was exclusive and you had the money, you would just go. Now it's way different. Like I said, it's why this money, and like the markets now we all know are very turbulent. And so being able to raise money now has its own part of the story for it. And like, how does that correlate with COVID? Or is this because of the changing job markets? Is this because of the technology revolution that we're in, the great resignation, all of these different things? So you really have to figure out how to tie it back. And funding has been harder to place more recently. I'm working on one now, and it's a constant back and forth with people of, why is this important? Why do I care? So yeah, I think it's definitely gotten harder to pitch the funding, but that makes it more fun. The challenge is half the fun of this.
Yeah, I love that. And I also love that you say that more important even than the amount is the context and the vision, and like, why does this matter? What is this company going to do to change an industry or to move something forward, or kind of the context behind the funding. And I really love that, because I think anyone who's joining us today, it gives some hope. Like, if you raise $1 million, sure, TechCrunch might not be interested, but a lot of other outlets might be, if you have the right contextual, interesting story hook as to why this matters to the world or to an industry or whatever.
Yeah, and I would say talk to the investors. Obviously, your client has their story that they want to tell, and that's your objective, and that's very important. But the investors know what else is happening out there and how this ties into other things that they're seeing, and they have always provided a really unique perspective and has helped place some stories. If you're pitching like the company and the product as one thing, and then you talk to the investors and they're like, I'm investing in this because this is what I see coming down the line, or this is addressing this gap in the market, and being able to tell the reporter those pieces. Because I think too many PR people think that a reporter's job is to be their marketing buddy, and couldn't be farther from the truth. Their job is not to tell our stories, and our job is not to give them our marketing language. It's to tell them why this matters. And I think the investors are the ones that really have that gritty look at the market and know why they're putting millions of dollars behind this company.
Yeah, that's a great point. So if we go to the next slide, I want to get into some actual data. I know you love data, Natalie, as well, and that's what we're all about, making PR more data-driven. So at the beginning of the month, we looked at over 3,000 real PR funding pitches that have been sent through Propel, through our Gmail or Outlook plugins. And this is part of our Propel Media Barometer, which is the data that we release every month and every quarter. And we'll drop a link to our latest full barometer in the chat. And we ended up coming up with some very interesting insights. So first of all, we've been talking about response rates to PR pitches for a while, maybe a year and a half. And we've been analyzing this in our barometers every quarter for the last year and a half. And what we see is that the average response rate to a funding pitch was nearly double the average response rate to all the other pitches. So the average response rate to pitches in general was 3.25%. And the average response rate to a funding pitch was over 6%. So obviously 6%, isn't amazing. There's room for improvement. But I think it's interesting that it's double the overall average. And I think it points to the fact that journalists are interested in this kind of news. Readers want to know what companies are getting funding. They want to know which industries are being disrupted. And so I think this is encouraging to all of you tech PR pros that are pitching funding announcements. Natalie, curious to get your take. Do these numbers surprise you? Would you have thought it was higher, lower? Any other thoughts on the response rate?
The disparities between the two don't surprise me because funding is hard news, and that's what reporters are always looking for. Yes, there's those evergreen thought leadership angles and your company's launching a new product, et cetera, but funding is really that hard moment. The 6% is kind of scary. I hope it's higher than that for some people, but I think when you have that hard news, maybe in the subject line or the money in there, exclusive is going to probably get your open rates higher if you're actually pitching a true exclusive to somebody. So not super surprising between the two, but I would like to see the percent rates a little higher.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think the more PR professionals can use tools to manage those relationships, whether it's Propel PRM or another CRM, I think that can help a lot as you start to make sort of the practice of PR more data-driven. But if we go to the next slide, I wanted to go into the data around the pitch itself. And so we saw some interesting trends. And one thing that we noticed is that for funding pitches and for general pitches, the subject line is a big factor. And we've seen that the shorter subject lines tend to get a much higher response rate, like significantly higher. So if we look at these different buckets of word length, we can see that those that are 1 to 5 words just have significantly higher open and response rates than the others. However, very, very, very few pitches are sent that only have 1 to 5 words in the subject. That's why the blue bar is very tiny. So the question is why? Why are PR pros sending most of their pitches with 10 to 15 words in the subject, and yet we know that the shorter subject lines do better? Natalie, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like to put a lot of pedigree in the subject line. I think it's important, especially for maybe a seed, a Series A company, to put the team behind it, because you want to know that they have the knowledge of how to do that and bring something to market. And I think for the actual length of it, you have to consider, first of all, journalists get hundreds and hundreds of emails every day, and so yours needs to stick out. I found that having a not PR subject line has been really helpful so that it doesn't get buried in there with everybody else. And then putting up front, if you can, the funding amount, the company, which if you're doing an exclusive, maybe you don't do that. And then the date that the news is going live is really helpful to the reporters. I think not trying to do like this catchy bait and switch of like, this is really cool, open me, is not useful for them. You have to be respectful of their time and of their interest, and making sure that's really personalized. So like Natasha, 17 million new fintech company addressing X, Y, and Z, something very direct like that, so they know that they want to open it. I would love to see a pitch of a subject line of 1 word, but I often just use like a QQ, so like a quick question regarding funding or something like that. And for people that I've worked with before and know my name when it comes through, it's been really good. But yeah, I would say lead with pedigree. We do that really heavily at BSC, again, so that the reporter knows like, oh, someone from Apple and Nike and Tonal are coming together for X, Y, and Z, gives them some direction of the team behind the funding.
Super interesting. Thank you for those insights. If we go to the next slide, we also looked at the body length, and we found that this also aligned with the findings that we had in the Q2 barometer about all pitches in general. And we're seeing much better results for pitches that are under 300 words. But again, we're seeing a lot of pitches going in that 500 plus word range. I don't know about you, Natalie, but I mean, I always felt at my agency that, you know, writing an essay in a pitch is always a horrible idea. And it's almost like dating in a way, you know, you want to start off a little more informal, have it be a give and take rather than, you know, getting to, you know, the engagement on day one, which is the equivalent of giving all the information in a 500 plus word essay in your very first email. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Because you first want to see if they're even interested in it and tell them why this is important. And that goes back to my earlier statement about throw out the marketing language, throw out, you know, like, oh, this is our key tagline or something. It's usually fluffy. It doesn't make sense to somebody else. When I write a pitch, I write it and then I cut it and then I walk away and then I come back and I cut it again. And then I send it to somebody and I say, what doesn't need to be in here for this first round, and cut that out. Once the reporter has expressed interest in it, great, give them all the information that they need to have in there, but go really short at first, I think will reflect very well as a publicist for the journalists, that you understand and respect their time. And that way they actually know what the news is. They don't have to like dig around and figure out what it is that you're trying to pitch. So you can lead with like, funding, trying to give you the exclusive for this funding round. Here's why it's important. Here's the people behind it. Are you interested in hearing more? And then once it's a yes, then you can give them all of the other details.
That makes a lot of sense. And when you say really short, are you talking 2 sentences, usually 3, 4? I mean, how does that look?
Yeah, I'm not good at the 4-sentence thing. I would love to be better at that. Mine are probably 2 paragraphs, each 3 sentences each. So I would say about 6. And that should change for everybody that you're pitching it to based on what they're covering and what part of the news that they're interested in. So again, like tailoring, hopefully everybody here knows how important that is. But like I said, with TechCrunch, they want to know the investors. With Fast Company, they want to know like what's happening and how this is impacting people's lives. And so making sure that your few sentences really point to that, and including maybe the investors that they've covered before or followed, so that they know like, oh, you're really into offline VC, and knowing what's happening in that world and including those there and bolding them, I think is really important.
That's extremely interesting. And I agree with all of those points. I really couldn't agree more that, you know, when you're trying to get interest in a funding pitch, or really any pitch, like teasing the highlights is the way to go in that first initial email. And then only once the journalist engages, then giving them sort of the full download with the release and all that. Want to save some of the goodies for later, so to speak. So taking things to a step further, if we go to the next slide, we want to get into some real campaign stories and funding pitching stories, and learn a little more from your experience, Natalie, about kind of what went well and where you found success. So I know you shared with us a couple examples here on the next slide, and would love to just hear you talk through for everyone on the webinar today, you know, what worked.
Yeah. This is what I was saying earlier, where this $215 million round was so much harder than this $6 million round. The 6, I think, I was really proud of how this got placed. And we were trying to pitch it as like this product, this new innovation in this space, and it wasn't landing. I think it felt a little too fluffy for some people. Anara is a weight management platform that integrates with primary care providers. So whereas Noom and all of those other ones, it's either you do intermittent fasting or you do keto, and this is kind of a more integrative piece of it. And Erin Broadwin, in my opinion, is one of the top digital health reporters anywhere. She came from Stat. I think she was at Insider for a hot minute, and now she's at Axios. But when we were having that challenge, that's when I went back to the investors and was like, why Why is this so interesting and important to you? And they were talking about this shift from B2B, B2C, so direct to consumer, D2C, to B2B2C, which is business to business to consumer, to make sure that the doctor is in the loop. So I went to Erin, we were talking about, during COVID, it was very much a direct to consumer thing because you didn't have access to your providers, and that worked for then, and it's changing now. And so this new company was evolving with that. So going to her with what that new market niche was really nailed that one. Lydia at Wall Street Journal, this was a 3-year relationship building. Credit where credit is due. I worked on this account, and one of my colleagues placed the story with her. But it was 3 years of really talking to her and explaining what this company was and why it was different and what it was not. I think there was a lot of confusion about what they did and what they didn't and which industry they were in. And the industry that she thought they were in was saturated in money. And so this 215 didn't really matter because everybody else is getting $100+ million rounds too. So being able to have that conversation with her and tell her like why this is different, and again, why these investors are invested in this specific company and how it's changing is what really helped land that. But I think, and it also always goes back to like, you have those relationships, and relationships are so important in this world and PR. And if you don't have them, your job is going to be a lot harder. But again, it's going back and understanding that Erin and Axios in general, they like the trends and like the bigger pieces and where those fit in. And so placing it with them. And the journal looks a lot more at global trends, I would say, and how that impacts the end consumer. And so being able to speak that way to it. And then with Erin, that one was really cool as well, because typically her reporting is behind a paywall. And her and I just chatted about it, and I was like, this is exclusive, and we have a lot of investors that are going to be sharing this news, and having it behind a paywall is going to be really challenging to get more views on it. And was able to negotiate with her to have it in front of the paywall for X amount of days before it went behind. And so again, just having those communications with her and saying, I know that it's very important to you to get views and clicks and engagement with your articles. This is how I'm going to support that, but I also need this from you in order to make that happen. And just having that genuine conversation and recognizing that Erin is also just over there having her morning coffee, working at her computer, and being respectful of what it is that I know that she needs and her editors as well.
Mm-hmm. That is just fantastically refreshing because the conventional wisdom would obviously be that the $215 million announcement would be way easier to get coverage than 6 million. And yet Natalie is telling us that it was the total opposite. And the $6 million announcement was much more successful. And that's so refreshing because it's just a reminder that it's not all about the dollars and the amounts. It's really about what is the vision of this company behind this funding announcement? What industry or industries are they changing? How are they affecting the world? And if it's a great story and a great vision, that can do much better than a huge funding round. And that's awesome. I really love that example. And it's such an extreme difference in amounts that it really kind of drives home that point.
I think earlier you mentioned at your previous agency that's $200,000 round or something like that too. And finding what makes the investors behind your company unique is important as well. So less than 1% of VC dollars goes to women. And so if you have $2 million from a minority woman, then that's another piece of this puzzle. And it's like amazing, great. We need that money into those, to more diverse communities. And journalists understand that, and they're going to have a much bigger impact than maybe 215 million. That's from people that have all this money and invest it and, you know, maybe a little bit more detached. So I think using Crunchbase as well to say, okay, we've seen, this is an arbitrary number, but $1.6 billion has gone into digital healthcare, but 300 million is going into primary care type things. So like, where's this gap coming from? And addressing that can help make the story really interesting as well.
Yeah, that is a fantastic point. Awesome. Well, if we go to the next slide, just to kind of wrap things up on the data side of things, I wanted to highlight some interesting points that we've seen from analyzing thousands and thousands of real PR pitches. And Sam, who's our brilliant content lead behind the barometer, will paste a link in the chat to our latest barometer again. But what we've seen is that so many of the outlets that got pitched for funding news actually didn't even respond at all. So out of the top 10 most pitched outlets for funding news, 5 of them had a 0% response rate. I'll say that again. 5 out of the 10 of the most pitched outlets for funding news had a 0% response rate. And so, you know, this drives home the point that looking at the response rate of each outlet and also looking at the topics that each outlet truly prefers to be pitched is so vital. And that's what we've done in Propel with our pitching preferences. So we analyze millions of pitches in an anonymized, aggregated way. And we extract what are the topics that each journalist and outlet most responds to, and what's their global response rate. And now you can see, like here on the left, you know, we have the New York Times, which everyone wants to get into, and they have a much lower response rate. And funding news is one of the topics they most like to be pitched. And then on the right, we have Lawn and Landscape, which is obviously a very niche trade publication, but they also like to be pitched funding news, and they have a very high response rate. And for most companies, that's not a relevant outlet. But if you're an agri-tech company or a green tech company, that might be an awesome outlet to have your funding news in. So again, if you want to learn more about pitching preferences and all the other features in Propel, we invite you to download our free tool. So we are the only PR software that has a free version. And if we go to the next slide, you can see that at propelmypr.com, and you can get started right away for free. Sam will drop the link in the chat for the free sign up, and we'd love to have you check it out and let us know what you think. We also have a new guide that we just published called Craft the Perfect Funding Announcement PR Pitch. And you're welcome to download that as well from our site. And we'll be drilling into all the stats that we discussed today and more. And this has been an awesome discussion, Natalie, and really insightful points, really interesting stuff and stories. And now we're excited to open up to any Q&A. So why don't we get that started?
I have one comment on the New York Times versus Lawn and Garden. I think we should always really keep in mind where our audience is at. And yes, we see the New York Times, and every founder that I talk to wants to be profiled in the New York Times, but recognize that they don't really cover C through maybe C or D they'll get into, but it has to be a really, really established company. So be honest with yourself. When I'm pitching this $6 million funding round, New York Times is not going to cover it. I can write the most beautiful, perfect pitch, and I can tell you why this is so important to 110 million Americans that need it. And that's just not what New York Times is going to cover. And that's okay, because your niche trades, which sure on paper have a smaller audience, but those are the people that care and are going to be more inclined to answer it. New York Times has so much coverage every single day. And so, yes, you have 150 million monthly readers, but which of those are actually going to go and read your story versus a smaller publication that maybe has less readers in general, but more people are going to be inclined to read your piece, and that's your end audience, having them there. So I think that's really important, and a conversation that you just have to have with your clients and to level set with them of, yeah, I also want to place something with the New York Times. That would be great for me too. But let's go back to our objectives and our purpose and our audience here, and what makes the most sense for us to place this so that it's not an ego boost or drinking too much of your own Kool-Aid, which a lot of founders do, and rightly so. They've put a lot of time and investments in their company. But I just want to encourage people to get away from the mindset of like, I have to get the biggest one, because that biggest is so subjective and could not do you as much good as a smaller trade.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's always nice to get in, a major national publication, but oftentimes the biggest effect will be from the niche, super targeted, super relevant publication for your niche. And, for Propel, I would have to think long and hard if we would rather be featured in some article in the New York Times that's not super relevant to us versus a great feature in PR Week or Spin Sucks or another great PR publication. So a few questions here. First one from the audience: how much should I follow up on a funding pitch? Natalie, what's your best practice on that?
Depends on who you're pitching, what you're pitching, if it's an exclusive, and how much time. Like I said, giving them 2 weeks minimum, I think, is the best to do that. That way they have time in their schedule and you can also follow up. If it's exclusive and you're on a tight timeline, I think one follow-up pitch within 24 to 48 hours is acceptable. You can use Twitter to follow up. I don't pitch on Twitter, but I will DM or at somebody and just say like, hey, I have a really story that I think you would love. It's in your inbox from Natalie at VSC, or texting on a very occasional way. Again, hey, Clint, I know this is a story for you. I just sent it via email. I know you're at a conference this week and our head's down, but when you have a chance, let me know. So again, I'm not pitching, I'm not sending a bunch of information over, but I'm giving them a follow-up, and I say, I'm following up via text because we're announcing this next week and I know the timeline is tight. If you send a third email, you're probably just going to piss the other person off. Nobody wants to get that. Think about yourself in your inbox. And if some marketing company is in mine, which happened yesterday, and third time they said, I'm not sure if you're receiving my email. I'm like, I am. I'm not responding because I'm not interested in it. Put yourself back in those shoes. Nobody wants to be followed up with 3 times. Take the hint. You're dating. They're not interested. But I think one time is appropriate.
Yeah, that's exactly what we recommend also at Propel, is one time, and if not, move on, find a better target, try perhaps a different pitch in the future, but exactly.
And add value to your follow-up. Don't just say, hey, following up, what do you think? Hey, saw that you just wrote this story. This is a great tangential piece. Not this is the same, because they don't want to write the same story twice in a row, but notice that you were interested in this trend. That's why I'm reaching out. Saw you're on PTO. So just making sure that this is top of your inbox, all PR type speak. But what I don't like to see is, hey, just checking in to see if you got my email. There's no value add there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's sort of a very stale, non-interesting, kind of annoying follow-up if you do it that way.
Yep.
Another question. So if you have a large media list, do you go in and change the subject line for each journalist? Do you think it's important to do that?
Yeah, if you're pitching funding, because if you're going to tech media versus business versus a niche, then your subject line should be different. I am not of the mindset that I use mass pitching. I never have. I think it's too impersonal. So yeah, I would say you can change the subject line, see what works, send 5 out. If they don't open well, then maybe change up your subject line. But yeah, I think it's totally fine to change them. I'm weird about subject lines. I think that they are important and they have a place, but the more thought you put into them, the more that it just looks like a generic subject line and are maybe less interested in opening it.
Next question, what type of PR pitch do you think is the hardest to get placed? How do you think pitching funding news compares?
Thought leadership is really hard because you are an expert in your own mind and you have to validate that. Funding news, again, is actual hard news and reporters cover the news. And I think often that's a disconnect between journalists and PR people is, well, I have this really cool idea or this new product, and that's not news. That's your company rolled out something new versus funding is very much hard news. There's a place and a time for thought leadership and expertise, and every reporter has very different preferences on how they receive that. If it's a quote, if it's an interview, if it's background. So yeah, I think funding is a little bit easier just because it is hard news. But again, if you are pitching thought leadership or something evergreen or an update, try to provide something contrarian to what else is being out there, or point out like, hey, this is getting a lot of coverage. Here's something that I haven't seen coverage, which I think is really important. And as publicists, when you're even on an interview with a client or something, a lot more journalists have been putting the questions back on me of what's not being covered out there. And so having that answer ready of, well, we talk about this a lot, but no one's talking about this sector, and we're starting to see money going into there. And that's why that's really interesting, and having those conversations about things that are a little bit more evergreen.
Great point on that. I have one more question. So how much do you think your odds of coverage go down if you only give journalists a 1-week window rather than 2 or 3 weeks? How important is that lead time?
Vital. They have their plans out 3-4 weeks, maybe sometimes. And it's not respectful, in my opinion, to say like, hey, this is going out next week and I really need you to cover it, because they want to do their own research so that they understand the market around it. They want to talk to investors. They have to write. Their editor has to look at it. They have their own publishing schedule. So I think giving them as much heads up as possible. And sometimes maybe that 3 weeks isn't doable. And in that case, sometimes I'll email the reporter that I know that I'm going to go to and say, hey, how far are you booking out right now? I have news slated for this date. I'll share it as soon as I can, but your schedule is really helpful for me to know how I can work backwards from there. And so again, being genuine and honest with like, here's what I have. What do you need? How do we make these things work together?
Awesome. Actually, we have one more audience question that came in, and with multinational corporations, the value of funding varies greatly across countries due to currency exchanges. How can this be tackled if the funding PR pitch is to be sent across to different countries' journalists?
That is a specific question. I don't know. I don't do international with the currency. If I was asked to do that, I would probably look at the money in those markets and how that country is maybe leading in something. Like if it's Europe and it's healthcare, then they're leading the charge in healthcare. And if they're putting money behind it, then it's important. I have no idea about currency exchanges.
Yeah, so we have a little bit of experience at Propel pitching our funding announcement to both Israeli and American publications. And what we did was we pitched the dollar amount to American journalists and to Israeli journalists. So we didn't do a currency exchange to shekels. And I think with the dollar being sort of, the main currency, especially in tech, it would be fine to pitch that. That's my opinion. You may want to convert it to pounds if you're pitching to UK, or maybe to euro if you're pitching to European outlets. But I think keeping it as dollar is fine as well. If you're coming in the opposite direction and you're a European company, you're pitching American, I'd probably convert it to dollars, but that's just my take. I guess it's very dollar centric, but that would be my take on that. So those are all the questions we had. This was a fantastic discussion, really insightful knowledge and experience, Natalie, that you shared. We appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining. We had so many people join us today from all over the world. Again, we invite you to visit us at propelmypr.com. We have all the links in the chat if you want to learn more about our PR management software and what we can do to help you improve your coverage and your response rates, and also measure your business outcomes from PR. So again, thank you so much, Natalie, and thank you everyone, and we'll see you at the next webinar.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.